You know, Crown American was well known for great looking malls of the 80s and 70s, but they never did that well. Well, here's the exception to that rule, the Francis Scott Key Mall. Still looks great, but it has a ton of stuff to its name. Come along and you'll see what I mean. As a Crown American original, Francis Scott Key Mall would get started in 1978, competing with the Fredericktown Mall. Original anchors would be Sears, GB, and Hess's, while Woolworth would operate as a supporting junior anchor. At the time, the mall would be competing against the Fredericktown Mall on the West End, but the two would manage to coexist with different anchor lineups and inline offerings. Things would be quiet at first, but Fredericktown Mall would begin to lag behind as the mall and the surrounding area became notorious for crime. While Fredericktown Mall began to fall apart, Francis Scott Key Mall would benefit greatly as tenants fled from US 40. In 1991, Leggett would open a fresh department store, expanding the FSK Mall. However, as Belk acquired the Leggett chain, Belk would opt to sell the space rather than continue operations. This allowed JCPenney to flee Fredericktown Mall in 1996, opening in Leggett's place. This mall was renovated sometime in 1991, and I think it still looks great. And they still have a fountain too. I mean, what more could you ask for? In 1994, Hess's would sell its anchor pad at the FSK Mall to Hecht's, and Hecht's was happy to continue operations. Meanwhile, GB couldn't stay alive, the owners selling the company off after they emerged from bankruptcy in 1992. This led to Value City taking over operations for the time being. Elsewhere, Woolworth would finally kick the bucket sometime in the mid-90s, and their vacancy would be hollowed out for more inline space. The 2000s were once again great for the mall, with only some minor turbulence here and there. Hecht's would be taken over by Macy's in 2006, while Value City would consolidate operations in their pad, cutting their overall square footage in half and rebranding into Value City Furniture, of which was still there as of the making of this video. The other half of their anchor pad would be cleared to make way for a DSW shoe warehouse. Enter the 2010s, and Dick's Sporting Goods would sign on with their own anchor pad in 2014, which explains why it looks a little awkward on the footprint. Aside from the current owners, Pennsylvania Real Estate Investment Trust, having major economic problems, there really isn't that much of note happening in the 2010s, and this mall did make it through the beginning of the terrible 20s just fine. However, take note of the Sears pad that we're about to see. Take a good long hard look while you can, because you aren't going inside of that store ever again. At least, not without committing breaking and entering, which I know of a few people that will do that. In December 2022, it was announced that Sears would be closing in January 15th, 2023. Surprise, surprise. Although it's surprising to see that Sears lasted that long. Sears is now becoming one of those nameplates where the story behind it is more interesting than the store itself. I would be lying if I said that I never perk up when I see a Sears store that's still open. It's rare, and what's weird is that I saw 2 of them in 2022. You'll have to wait and see the other one though. Also, on another, potentially more upbeat note, Rick Astley was playing inside this mall at one point. I didn't get Rick-rolled, but I did, however, get together forevered. Today, the mall continues operations without much issue. The only real red flag to speak of is the now empty Sears building, but I have mild confidence that management will be able to tackle this issue and fill in the vacancy. The mall isn't perfect, as you still have vacancies in line here and there, but I also notice a switch towards community-oriented activities, like that swimming school for kids that I do try to politely avoid with the camera. Overall, FSK Mall remains as a solid performer and has ample opportunity to adapt to these trying times. What will actually happen remains to be seen, but we can only wait and see at this time. I did mention how I like the early 90s design present throughout this mall. You can still find some funky geometry in the ceilings that were a Crown American staple in the 70s, but compared to other Crown American malls that got a renovation, I'd say this renovation was the best out of them. The center court in particular steals the show with its trees and fountain display. Sure, some will still call it dated, but there's still a good amount of charm to this mall. Now, while I do like it, part of me still wonders what the mall looked like day one. Lots of pictures of what the mall looked like post-renovation, but nothing pre-renovation. An independent music store. You don't see a lot of those at the mall anymore. Frederick itself is a decent town. It's certainly big enough to support a mall, and considering Baltimore exists, it is one of the better towns to live in if you have to live in the state of Maryland. Cost of living is god-awful, but crime, employment, and schools are all okay. And according to Area Vibes, the city amenities are great, and the users on that site love Frederick. So on paper, FSK Mall should continue to do well. If you're local to the area, why not share some ideas on keeping the mall afloat? And maybe what to do with that old Sears if management hasn't already devised a plan. Well, I still got time. Let's talk a little deeper on malls for the sake of conversation and argument. You ever notice that most shopping malls don't have any grocery stores? I mean, as much as I like malls, one fatal flaw I notice is that it's almost exclusively boutique fashion and toys, and maybe entertainment if you're lucky. Most malls do have a range of food stalls as well as sit-down restaurants, which is a good start, but there's never any store for the essentials. People forget nowadays, but Kmart did fulfill that niche, and to a lesser degree, Rose's or Big Lots can take that role today, even if they're kinda junky. And while you could argue about the home departments and premier stores like Belk or Macy's, what about grocery stores? Yeah, that one tends to get ignored. And no, I am not counting Walmart, since 9 times out of 10, they aren't exactly a true part of the mall when present. That and it's Walmart. Ew. But what I'm trying to say is that in highlighting all of this, maybe bring malls closer to an all-purpose shopping destination, where you can get your grocery shopping, commodities, and a few fashion staples all in the same building. It's just a thought, and I know it'll never happen because I'm something of an anti-trendsetter and an involuntary hipster. An inster, you could say. But still, this is one of those things I want someone to prove me wrong on. Now, lifestyle centers are going towards that path, but we'll talk about that in another video. We're reaching the end soon anyway. Do keep the conversation going down in the comments, though. Thanks for having me, Frederick, Maryland. And until next time, this is Doomie Grunt wishing you and the FSK Mall farewell and good luck in this mad, mad, mad world. For those of you who know what the backrooms are, you ever notice how some of the newer designs look exactly like an empty Sears?